Everybody hopefully is here for the Writing Comics panel. Come on in, make yourselves comfortable. We're just getting started. Some great costumes coming in the room now. Black fold, don't like fold. Wow.
Nice.
You see that very often.
No, you don't. No, you don't. Mary Frances, bring my bag, please.
Yep. So we will get started. My name is Brian Latendry. I am very fortunate today to be hosting a panel on writing comics with two absolute legends of the industry, Danny Fingeroth and Denny O'Neill. Of course, Denny, I mean, we could talk for an hour just about the resumes of these two longtime creators, writers, editors. Of course, Denny, Batman, The Flash, Green Lantern, Green Arrow, The Question. Actually, I have a funny Denny O'Neill story. My first introduction to the Batman Nightfall story was the novelization of the Batman Nightfall story. And that was how I experienced that story for the first time. I actually was not collecting comics at that time, and that is how I first experienced it. So I actually found some of Denny's stuff through his fiction writing. And of course, Danny Fingeroth, longtime Marvel editor on the Spider-Man group, wrote the entire run of Darkhawk, writes for Right Now magazine, Deadly Foes of Spider-Man, and also Invented Right Now magazine, and also wrote How to Create Comics from Script to Print, which we'll be talking a little bit about today as we go through. And of course, Denny, the DC Comics Guide to Writing Comics. So if there are two gentlemen who are well qualified to talk to a group of people about writing comic books, these are those two gentlemen. And so we will have plenty of time for you to ask questions, because I don't want to rob any of you of the opportunity to ask these guys questions. But I think, and the other thing I should mention is with 45 minutes, these two gentlemen also teach classes on writing comics. And so for them to try and encapsulate that in 45 minutes, that would be a little bit crazy. So we'll skip around a little bit and we'll talk about some of the high points, but I want to also open it up to your questions. So I guess maybe a good place to start is, because both of you gentlemen teach classes on writing comics, when you get a classroom full of new students, whether they're aspiring writers or they are folks who have been writing their own comics, maybe self-publishing, and are coming to you for guidance, when you get that room full of students, how do you sort of open up the discussion with them of, so you want to write comics, where do you start with them?
Wow. I usually start with reading a story that breaks every rule that I'm going to tell them afterwards. Which is the Harvey Pekar name story, which is not a superhero story. It's 4 pages of 12 panels each, drawn by Robert Crumb of Harvey Pekar talking to the reader. And I find it riveting, brilliant. Nothing goes on in it. He talks about how many Harvey Pekars there are in the Cleveland phone book. It's a scene in American Splendor if you've seen it. And yet it works, and it, and it does have beginning, middle, end conflict. It has all those elements of a story, and yet it's so atypical. So I sort of, I will often introduce it to something like that.
I tell them what a story is. Millions of English majors think they know, but they don't, because it has to do with plot and structure. Those things were not taught when I was an English major 67 years ago. And according to people who are my grandchildren's age, if I had grandchildren, they still aren't, mostly. That's very important to know. So I define story, I define structure, I talk a little bit about the difference between being an amateur writer and being a professional. One is something you do when it's fun. The other is something you do because you promised to do it. And most of the time it is fun. And these guys who say, I suffer so much because I write Hemingway. You sit in front of a piece of paper until you sweat blood. Come on, Ernie. If it's that bad, don't do it. Jesus, you can find some other way. Most of my writing life has been very satisfactory. However, I have had not too many hassles with editors because I have been aware that I made promises. I am also aware that other people are waiting for me to do my job before they can do theirs, and they have kids in school and mortgages. So one of our mantras is you've got to respect it as an art form, but regard it as a job. The same is true probably of your favorite novelist or favorite movie director. And if that's the problem, making the transition from fan to professional. So you have a fan's mentality. You do it when you feel like doing it, when it's fun. A professional, you do it.
I think so. The corollary to that, and part of the difference between being a fan or a quote-unquote amateur and a professional, is, you know, my mantra, which I tell myself all the time, is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the deadline can be your friend, because sometimes you just got to finish it. And while I would never say it's good enough, sometimes it's just good enough, you know, because for your own, A, you may have a sign, B, for your own personal growth and development, finish it and move on. Next one will be better.
Yeah, I am not the world's biggest fan of Mickey Spillane, ex-comic book writer, by the way. But one thing he said is something I like to keep in mind. He said, I am not an author, I am a writer. When I'm working, it's a set of narrative problems that I have promised to solve by a given date. That's not odious, that's not horrible, that's not working in a bottle factory or unloading ships or any of the really rotten jobs. You're sitting in a pleasant, cool room in comfort. But I try not to think about the afterlife. If I could get very erudite for a moment, the Bhagavad Gita, and I'm sure you are all familiar with that, says,
Is that Marvel or DC?
Tells us that you have no control over the outcome of what you do. You shoot the arrow and you hope it goes where you want it to, but your job is just to get the arrow shot. One of the guys who worked on the Batman movies told me, I wrote the first script, I had the privilege of doing that. If it turns out to be Citizen Kane or the worst piece of garbage ever put on celluloid, in either case it doesn't have much to do with me. I've had the privilege of being the first to tell the story. And if you ever work in television or cinema, you know that it's going to get, some actor is going to say, you know, I don't feel like doing this. I'm going to make up my own dialogue for this scene. I wrote a TV show in which the guy did a funny voice at the top of Act 2. It had nothing to do with the story, but I was told, well, he wanted to show that he could do different voices. That's the kind of frustration you put up with. But you were very well paid for it, and the original story was yours. There is some satisfaction.
I just want to say there's an added level of stress because Black Bolt is here.
Right.
And he's staring at me. And so if I'm not especially witty, it's because I'm afraid of making him laugh too hard.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
I don't want to be responsible for the whole building coming down.
And hopefully